In this video, I'm going to give you 5 screenplay tips and techniques to write an opening nobody can turn away from. So picture this scene. A man and his wife exit his house. They kiss, they go into his car, and they're about to drive off to go to work. They look up through the windshield, and a woman walks up in front of the car, and she's holding a can of kerosene in one hand and a match in the other hand. The man and his wife panic. They try to exit the car, and they try the handles of the car, and it's locked from the outside, so they're trapped inside. The woman who's looking through the windscreen strikes the match and drops it on the floor, and the flame trails down a line of kerosene all the way to the car, and the car explodes. And the very next scene you see is a cafe, calm in the morning. People are just going in to grab their coffee before going to work. And the man who we'd seen with his wife get into the car and just get blown up in the car walks into the cafe and takes a seat at one of the tables. A waitress walks over to that table to take his order. And the waitress, when he looks up to look at who this waitress is, happens to be the woman that walked in front of the car in the first scene and killed him and his wife. Now I ask you, if you saw that scene as the opening to a film, or you read that as the opening scene of a script, the first 5 pages, would you turn the page to see what happens next? So what I've discovered over my 20 years as a professional screenwriter is that if you can keep a reader for the first 5 pages of your screenplay, the percentage chance of you holding them for the rest of your script increases exponentially. But most people lose their readers in the first page of their screenplay because they don't employ some of the things I'm going to talk to you about in this video. Think about it this way. If you're unable to keep a producer, actor, or agent reading your script past the first 5 pages, the chances of you selling that script or ever getting that script made is just about 0. So the first of these 5 techniques is very simple. Keep your audience off balance. You need to open your screenplay with a first page that immediately takes your reader out of their comfort zone. This is just one of the ways that you can open a script to create an energy within your reader where they feel, oh my goodness, they sit up and pay attention because this is not something that they've expected. You start your script in such a way that the audience already comes into your story with expectations of the way certain stories are told. And if you're doing a story in a particular genre, that genre has been done to death. You know, they say there are only 7 story types in Western storytelling. So the likelihood that your story has been told in some way or fashion before is extremely high. What you're trying to do is to tell your story in a way that automatically pushes people out of their expectations of the way that narrative is going to go. So I'm going to give you an example of this. So The Godfather opens and it's a wedding, and you know, it's celebration, you've got people running around, they're having a party and so on and so forth. And that's something that people understand. You know, we know what a wedding is, we know what a celebration is, we know what a party is. And at the same time as that is happening, you have Vito Corleone, he's in a chair, and there's a man talking to him. Bonacera, I believe his name is. He is asking the Godfather a favor. So in the opening of The Godfather, you have an interesting dichotomy. You've got Connie Corleone getting married to Carlo, you know, which is a pivotal situation because of the role that he plays in the demise of Sonny later on in the film. And the Godfather is meeting with Bonacera, who his daughter has gone through a traumatic event, and he's asking the Godfather for a favor. The reason why this knocks you off balance as a reader when you're reading the script is that what is being asked is this guy is asking the Godfather to take out someone in revenge for the assault on his daughter, while the Godfather's daughter is getting married. And what this establishes in that scene is the kind of person the Godfather actually is, because of what this man has come to ask him to do. It's an incredibly arresting scene because it serves so many purposes at the same time. And because it does that, you sit up and pay attention. Because it would be very easy for Mario Puzo to have started that story in, it's a wedding, you know, everybody's whatever, and you introduce all the characters, and the Godfather comes out and he's this big mob boss. Fantastic. Or you could start it with a really violent scene where somebody is getting killed and there's a crime happening and this stuff, and there's people shooting and things are blowing up, like a mob movie or something. He could have done it that way. But he doesn't, because those things are expected. And if you read that, knowing that you're reading a mob script, your brain shuts off as a reader because you're like, oh, I've seen this before. Okay, la 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 la. Okay, cool. You know, maybe it's an interesting scene. The way they start this, or the way Mario Puzo starts the story, knocks you off balance as a reader because it's just so unexpected. You're like, oh wow, okay. So wait a minute, this the bad guy, and he's sitting there with a cat on his lap. So he's sensitive. He's not really doing anything crazy. He's very soft spoken. There's so much about that scene that takes you out of your expectation. That is the reason why any reader would want to read the next page. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a way you could do this in a scene. So I'm going to just come up with something and you will understand how this system works. So let's say you're making a movie about a swim team and you're writing a story. You know, the screenplay is about a swim team and it's about this protagonist who wants to make the school swim team. Now, the story that you have opens when these swimmers are lining up to swim a race. You know, they're lining up on the edge of the swimming pool. They've got their swim trunks on, their goggles and everything. And you're moving from swimmer to swimmer to swimmer. Lean, muscular, very athletic looking guys, you know, the typical swimmer build. And you're going from swimmer to swimmer. And you're hearing the voiceover of the protagonist, but it's not any of these guys you're seeing because, you know, the protagonist is going to be the last person in the line as you move down the line. And you're writing this. So you're like, okay, you're going to this swimmer, this a black guy, a white guy, a this person, lean, 6'1", whatever. And you're hearing the voice talk about this was my first race. You know, it's the first time that I'd actually had a competition and I had to win this because this was the heat. And if I didn't win this, I would be disqualified and I wouldn't be able to move. Something along those lines. And then you get to who this is at the end of the line, waiting to dive in to the pool for this race. And the person standing there has one leg and one arm. He's an amputee. You see that, and immediately that tells a massive story as to the obstacles this character is going to have to face. The fact that he is handicapped and he's now trying to win this race, and there are stakes already because the voiceover has told you that he needs to win this to prove that he can do it. And you've got a situation already that you sit up and you're like, oh my, you see, you start the scene, and the way that you started that scene is expectations. You're like, okay, I know it's a swim movie, and you're going to it and you're reading it and you're like, okay, you know, we're going to get to the character, we're going to see who he is, and you're focusing more on his personality and like, okay, look, is he going to make it? Is he any good? When you get that description in the script of what this guy looks like and like the fact that he is missing limbs, you're already hooked. Already, because even if for the next 5 pages, you just want to see what happens. Because you know that there's a script here, so you know there's an entire script, so that he must do something in this race of note for there to be a story. Even if he loses, something must happen in this scene that sets up the rest of the movie, so you're in. That is how you create that's how you create discomfort in your reader and you knock them off balance. It's like, oh my goodness, this is not what I expected. So you're going against expectation. This is an incredibly powerful way to start your story. And you see this in so many movies. You know, like I've just given you one. There are so many films that you see openings like this that go against your expectation and cause you to pay attention to what you're going to watch. It is very easy to tell a story which is very natural. And obviously, there are multiple stories, like when we go through the other points, that kind of thing makes sense. And the reason why that makes sense is because you're going for another kind of way of arresting your audience. So you don't need to do that. But if this is the pathway you choose, it is very effective. I use it sometimes and it's always works. So the next technique that you can use is creating a sense of urgency. What you want to do in the first page of your screenplay is set up a situation. And when I say first page, first 2 pages, first 3, 4, 5 pages, you set up a scenario, a sense of urgency that, oh my goodness, the protagonist or these people, the characters need to do something in order to avert a major catastrophe, or in order to avert a major disappointment or a major issue, or to even save their lives. A very good example of this is in Cliffhanger. So if you've seen Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone, watch that movie. And in the beginning of the script, the scenario is, this is a guy, he's a mountain guy, he's got this woman here. There's a situation that happens where the typical safety measures that would exist for this climb that they're doing doesn't work the way it was supposed to at that point. And all of a sudden, the life of his friend, of his compatriot, is on the line, and he's the only person that can save her. Now, that is super urgent because her life is on the line. And what it establishes is how proficient Sylvester Stallone's character is at that moment because of the fact that he's in a position where he could save this woman, but he's unable to. And, that sets up the whole movie because of his guilt and so forth and all the things he goes through as a result of that action. But what that does is it holds you for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the movie. You're in. Even if, for the rest of the story, you start drifting, what that sets for you is a tone of energy and momentum for the rest of that screenplay. This is a standard issue technique. Like, if you can create a sense of urgency in the first few pages of your script in any way, shape, or form, you are winning from that point. Another very famous one is Star Wars, A New Hope, the one with Princess Leia from the 70s, 77 movie. It starts with the Death Destroyer and Darth Vader boarding the Princess Leia's ship. So she's trying to escape, and there's a shootout, there are these lasers coming and everything, and she's in a hurry to try and get these plans out. And she goes and puts it in the droids, R2D2 and C3PO, and she puts them in these pods and sends them away with the plans that Darth Vader is trying to get. That is so effective because not only does it create an urgency in the moment where it holds you into the story right there, it also makes you want to read more, which is essentially what you want for your first 5 pages. You want to create a sense of urgency that people want to read more, that people want to see more. And regardless of what comes after that, you've at least held the reader for the first 5 pages. So there is a level of optimism you create with a reader that reads something like that and is hooked into it. They expect or hope that the rest of the script is going to be good at that point. If you lose them in the first 5 pages, they expect it's not going to get any better. So you would either lose them or they go into the next few pages expecting it to get worse, and then they're gone, never to return. You don't want that to happen to your story. Which leads me on to method number 3. This is obvious, and it's something that people don't really think. I didn't think about this a lot when I was writing in my early days. I really didn't. And it's really about making a human connection with the reader immediately, like really early in your script, trying to find a way that your protagonist or the scenario that you're presenting connects with the essence of the humanity of the reader that's reading it. Creating a scenario or a character that the reader can identify with, or know somebody that's like that, or you've gone through that experience before, or you understand how that feels, or it's something that you never want to experience but you're afraid of experiencing. Something of that type. I'll give you a very easy example of a human connection. Back to the Future opens with Marty McFly late for school, trying to get to school. He's got his guitar, you watch that, and especially when I was in the 80s, watching that, every kid wanted the stuff he had. Every kid who's a teenager wanted to be living that life. Every kid wanted to be that cool. Every kid wanted to have that experience. So when you watch it set up that way in the opening, what happens is that every young person who were the target demographic of that story, and I'm talking about, forget the way the film was depicted. When you're reading it, when the producer is reading it, the producer is going to read that script and be like, oh my, I know how to market this now. I'm reading this opening. This was me when I was 17, when I was 16, when I was 18. I know this kid. My kids are like this. I know kids like this. I know exactly who I'm going to cast in this film, where I can market this, because in the opening, you've really connected with the humanity. And like, oh, I know that feeling. He gets to school, he's late, he sees the headmaster, Strickland or whatever his name is, and he's chastising him. We've had these experiences. When he's going, is it detention, and then there's the bullies, and then there's the this and that. These are all very effective tools that happen in Back to the Future that are happening under the hood. You're not really thinking about these things, but you're reading that script and you're like, oh, this is really effective, because the whole opening of that film isn't about story as much as it's about connection, setting tone. There is very little plot that happens in those first 5 minutes of the script. There isn't. Like, there's nothing. If you took those out, the plot still works for Back to the Future. It doesn't really affect the plot of the movie. Yes, it introduces a few characters, but you could introduce those characters of just Marty McFly arriving in school. You could just have that happen. But the reason why they set it up that way is that they wanted to make him feel very relatable. How he's late, the fact that he loves guitar and he likes music and he's got all this sort of cool fashion sense for the 80s, of course, not now. It connects with you. Now you've got to look at your situation and figure out, how do I do this for my story? Office Space. If you've seen Office Space, Mike Judge movie, everybody who's a grown-up, who's had a job, when you watch the opening of that movie, you know how it feels like to go to an office that you do not want to be at. You know how to go to a job that you do not want to be working. You know that a lot of us have had bosses that we don't like, that we wish we could wring their neck, but you can't. We've had situations where you don't want to wake up in the morning to go to work, but you have to. Everybody's felt that way who is an adult that earns a wage. That's why Office Space opening is so good, because you're like, oh my God, I know that guy. Oh my goodness, I know that feeling. Oh, very, very, very effective. If you were doing this for your story and you were like, for example, you're doing a family story, whatever the narrative is, if you want to start the hook of your 5 pages being, I want to go for the human connection. I'm not going for a shocking thing. I'm not going for, urgency. I just want a human connection to really hook the reader. You can just have a situation where you depict the chaos of getting your kids ready for school and create scenarios in it that everybody can relate to in terms of waking them up, making breakfast, getting them dressed, making sure that their homework is ready, getting them in the car, getting them to school on time. And they not only, you can even mix and match a few things where you can even have a situation where the urgency is tied to that, whereby you need to get the kids to school and make it to work in time. You've been in that situation if you're a parent. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm late now. I have to figure out a way of wrangling all these people, getting them to school, and then making it from the school to work so I don't get in trouble at work. So much human connection in there. And if you do that effectively, the reader already is with you, because I'm like, oh, I know this. And again, the more unique that story is, and you can watch one of my videos where I talked about being a screenwriter and the fact that you've got to infuse it with your own personal experiences. If you're able to create unique scenarios in that, where these are things you've been through and you can make it really sound or read real when you're reading it, that is even more effective. Of just quirky things that have happened when you're trying to get your kids ready for school. You're trying to get yourself to work and you're late. And so, fantastic way. So those are a few examples, but again, it really is about thinking, what's my humanity and how can I get whoever is going to read these first 5 pages to identify with the situation or the characters. This next one is one of the most powerful tools because it forces the reader to read the entire script. This is why it's so hard to do effectively, because if you do it wrong, you could actually do the opposite and make the reader not want to read another page of your script. So it has to be incredibly compelling. This is showing the destination first. It's exactly what I'm saying. You literally show pretty much the end of the story or close to the end of the story at the beginning of your story, at the beginning of the script. Many films have done this. One of the most famous ones is Memento. So if you've seen Christopher Nolan's Memento, it actually begins with Lenny doing something. I do not want to spoil it if you've not seen the movie. Doing something that, or I won't spoil it, but I'll just say somebody is dead and he killed the person and you don't know who the person is. You want to find out who that person was. But the movie is all told backwards. So inherently, the movie is designed to use this mechanic of showing the beginning first. And from that point, the entire movie is tracing you to that beginning. So you're already hooked. You're like, I want to find out who this is. I want to find out how this character got himself into a position where he did this act. Very, very strong way. And again, like I said, if you get it wrong and you do something whereby your ending is not compelling, why would anybody want to read your script from that point? They just like, oh, I don't want to know how this happens. I don't care about how this happens. So if that's where I'm going, you stop reading, you throw it away. If you do it effectively, you've won already, because even if the script itself is weak, hopefully it's not, but even if it is, you still the desire for the reader wanting to know how it ends might be strong enough for them to actually get through the script and come back to you to tell you the things they didn't like within it, just because they wanted to see how it panned out. That's why this one is very effective. But again, it's challenging, and I don't advise you to opt or default for this unless you know that the ending of your story is incredibly strong and that it doesn't kill your story. In other words, the way this works is where the journey to get there is actually more interesting than the destination. The journey to get to the end of Memento is infinitely more interesting than the fact that he shot somebody at the end of the movie. How he got there is really the meat and drink of that story. Now, similarly, there's a movie that a lot of you guys wouldn't have seen, and it's called Sunset Boulevard. Some of you might have, it depends on your age. And Sunset Boulevard begins with a character, Joe Gillis. The character is dead. You know, it begins with the lead character dead in a swimming pool. The voiceover is of that character saying that he's dead. The movie basically is about how did you end up in this position? So the entire movie from that point is tracing how the lead character, whose voiceover you're hearing, ended up dead in a swimming pool at the beginning of the movie. Now, that is one of the classic films in Hollywood history. It's one of the first films to do that, to use this sort of technique of showing the ending first, showing the destination first. And that movie inspired a lot of other films to do that or to use that same technique. So it's a very, very effective tool. And there are many, many, many movies that utilize it. So you can actually even leave in the comments or leave a message letting me know if there are films that you've noticed that, oh, wow, I remember this film that showed the ending first and the whole movie was pretty much showing us how we got there. I would be wary of it as a first option because you need to be very confident that what you have is compelling. We already even did an example of this. You remember the first story that I told you about the woman who has the match and the can of kerosene, how that story ended? That's the end of that story. So I actually showed you an example of this with the example we used in the beginning, which uses two different techniques at the same time. It uses show the destination first, and it also utilizes getting the audience off balance early because it's just not something you're expecting. So those two things work hand in hand. And in fact, a lot of the things I'm telling you, that you can mix and match a lot of them if you can figure out a way to layer some of these techniques into the opening of your story. In fact, the more that you can mix and match them, the more powerful the hook is for the audience to stick with your script and to keep reading it. So this brings me on to the final technique that I'm going to tell you about in this video. And this is a basic one. Make your perspective clear. I mean, I cannot emphasize how important this is. It should have been number one. I just wanted to leave this till last because it is so foundational. We need to know whose perspective the story is being told from. And through that perspective is how you do any of the other things I told you about in the previous 4 techniques. We need to know whose story it is from the beginning, really, really early in the story, so that we can understand who our guide is, whose eyes we're going to see the story through. So if you look at The Matrix doesn't begin with the lead character, Thomas Anderson. It begins with Trinity and Agent Smith. So Trinity is being chased by the agents, and that is how it begins. So when you see that, you might think Trinity is the lead character, but she's not, because you see, that is utilizing you're off balance. And the reason why you're off balance, I mean, this happened to me big time when I saw that film. I mean, if you look at the script and the way it's written, you think it's a regular heist thing or somebody's being chased. It's just a regular situation. But what happens is there is a scene where she's cornered and she jumps up into the air and she's frozen and then does the whole bullet time thing. That moment tells you that, oh my goodness, this is not normal. We're not in a world that I've ever seen before. So automatically, you just want to understand how this is happening. And then from that point, she does the jump over the buildings and then the agents are flying all over the place. You're already like, oh my goodness, what is this world? What is this place? That does that for you to hook you. So now you're already in. Very quickly then, you're shown who the lead character is, Thomas Anderson. He's a hacker, stealing data, interacting with Morpheus over the internet, meets Trinity, who we've now seen already earlier on in the story. But we now understand he is the eyes that we're going to see this story through. So even though we've seen Trinity in the beginning, the eyes we're going to see this through is Thomas Anderson, and it's established that way. And it's established that, and why this is interesting is, and this is a sort of more complicated storytelling mechanism or technique, is the fact that we have information by this point that Thomas Anderson doesn't have. That Trinity and the world that these people are existing in is alternate to the world that Thomas Anderson thinks is real. We already know this because we saw that scene with Trinity before Thomas Anderson has any idea that the Matrix even exists, in terms of what the Matrix actually really is. Very, very important, guys. And I think, you know, Superman the movie is one of my favorite films of all time, if not my favorite film of all time. It's always between that and Empire Strikes Back. The beginning of the movie does a lot of the techniques that I've told you. First of all, Krypton gets destroyed, the way it gets destroyed. You are like off by, oh my goodness, it's crazy. At the same time, you're establishing a human connection. What's the human connection? Jor-El and his wife, their love for their son, and a father is trying to save his child. We can all connect with that. That's another layer. So that's the human connection. What's the state of urgency? The Krypton is about to be destroyed. So they're on a timer to get this kid off the planet before the planet gets destroyed. You've got everything. And then who is the story? Whose eyes are we going to see the story through? It's the baby's eyes. Because very quickly we establish this baby, and then we see the baby's journey from Krypton to Earth over time. You know, the movie is just a masterpiece, you know, especially the first half of that movie is one of the greatest first halves of a movie that I've ever watched in my life. But you see that, and you're with this character, with Kal-El. So they've done everything. And that's the reason why the movie is so strong, and why Mario Puzo essentially wrote 3 masterpieces in Superman the movie, Godfather Part 1 and 2. He did all of these things in the openings of his screenplay. So a lot of these techniques I'm telling you are present in some of the greatest scripts that have ever been written. They're present in the greatest screenplays that have ever been written. And I've just broken down for you like that. It's in Superman, which I consider one of the greatest scripts. You know, I know people might, oh, you know, it's a superhero movie. It's fantastic, as I said, especially the first half. Now that you know these 5 powerful techniques to writing an opening to your screenplay nobody can turn away from, make sure you're signed up to my newsletter, linked in the description, which also gives you access to my free ebook if you want to learn more about screenwriting. And if you want to know how I sold my first script for 6 figures, watch this video right here.